Maid is invited to a rich man's party as a joke, but she walks in and captures his heart. The crystal chandelier casts dancing shadows across the marble floor as Elliot Carter surveyed his pristine mansion. Everything had to be perfect for tonight's party, the most exclusive event of the social season. His fingers drummed against the mahogany banister as he mentally checked off the preparations: imported champagne, world-class catering, and guest lists filled with the city's elite. "Elliot, darling!" Caroline Whitmore's voice echoed through the foyer as she glided in, her designer heels clicking against the marble. Behind her followed the usual suspects: Marcus Wellington, the oil heir with more money than sense, and Victoria Ashford, whose family owned half the city's real estate. They were his closest friends, though sometimes Elliot wondered if that said more about his social circle than he cared to admit. "The place looks absolutely divine," Victoria purred, adjusting her pearl necklace. "But don't you think it's all a bit predictable? Same faces, same conversations about yacht purchases and charity galas." Marcus snorted, loosening his silk tie. "What do you suggest? Invite the gardener? Maybe the pool boy could regale us with tales of chlorine maintenance." "Actually," Caroline's eyes lit up with mischief, "what about that maid of yours? The quiet one who's always dusting around here like a little mouse. Nia something?" "Nia Brooks," Elliot said automatically, though he wasn't sure why he remembered her full name. She'd been working at the estate for 3 years, barely speaking above a whisper, always keeping her head down as she went about her duties. "Oh, this is rich!" Marcus clapped his hands together. "Imagine her face when she walks into a room full of people wearing more jewelry than she makes in a year. It would be absolutely priceless entertainment." Victoria giggled behind her manicured hand. "She'd probably hide in the corner all night, too intimidated to speak to anyone. Poor thing would be like a deer in headlights." Elliot felt an uncomfortable twist in his stomach, but his friend's laughter was infectious. He'd built his reputation on being the good sport, the one who never backed down from a dare or refused to play along with their games. Besides, what harm could it do? Nia would probably politely decline anyway. "You know what?" he heard himself saying. "Why not? It might be interesting to shake things up a bit." "Brilliant!" Caroline squealed. "Make sure you invite her properly, though. We want her to actually show up." As his friends continued planning their evening's entertainment, Elliot found himself walking toward the service quarters. The staff area was a world away from the opulent main house, functional, clean, but utterly ordinary. He'd rarely ventured here, leaving household management to his head butler, James. He found Nia in the laundry room, carefully folding linens with practiced precision. She looked up startled when she saw him, her dark eyes wide with surprise. "Mr. Carter! Is everything all right? Do you need something?" Her voice was soft, almost melodic, though he'd never really noticed before. She was younger than he'd thought, maybe mid-20s, with natural beauty that seemed almost out of place in the sterile uniform she wore. "Actually, Nia, I have something unusual to ask you." He cleared his throat, suddenly feeling awkward about his friend's scheme. "I'm hosting a party tonight, and I was wondering if you'd like to attend as a guest." The clean sheets slipped from her hands. "I'm sorry, what?" "A party. Tonight. As a guest, not working." The words felt strange coming out of his mouth. "It's just a small gathering, nothing too formal." Nia's face went through several expressions: confusion, disbelief, and something that might have been suspicion. "Mr. Carter, I don't understand. Why would you invite me to your party?" The question hung in the air, and for a moment, Elliot felt exposed. Why was he inviting her? Because his friends thought it would be funny? Because they were bored with their usual crowd? Neither reason felt particularly noble when faced with her genuine confusion. "Well," he said lamely, "everyone deserves a chance to have fun, right?" She studied his face for a long moment, and Elliot had the uncomfortable feeling that she could see right through him. But then something shifted in her expression, a spark of what might have been determination, or maybe defiance. "What time?" she asked quietly. 8 o'clock. Just come to the main entrance instead of the service door. After he left, Elliot couldn't shake the image of Nia's face when she'd asked why he was inviting her. There had been something in her eyes, not the simpleton his friends expected, but intelligence, wariness, and perhaps a hint of steel beneath the surface. Back in the main house, he found his friends sampling the evening's wine selection. "Mission accomplished," he announced. "She'll be here at 8. "Oh, this is going to be absolutely delicious." Victoria laughed. "I can't wait to see her trying to make conversation with the Pemberton twins about their latest European shopping spree. Just promise me someone will take photos," Marcus added. "This is going to be legendary." But as the afternoon wore on, Elliot found himself checking his watch more frequently than usual. Something about the way Nia had accepted his invitation nagged at him. She hadn't seemed grateful or excited like he'd expected. Instead, she looked calculating, as if she was making a decision about something far more important than a simple party invitation. By 7:30, the mansion was filled with the soft murmur of arriving guests, the clink of champagne glasses, and the gentle strains of background music. Elliot adjusted his bow tie and surveyed the crowd, exactly the same faces he'd been seeing at parties for the past decade. Old money, new money, and everyone desperately trying to prove they belong. "She's probably chickened out," Caroline whispered in his ear. "I bet she's cowering in her room, too scared to show her face." But Elliot wasn't so sure. Something in Nia's eyes had suggested she was made of stronger stuff than his friends assumed. As 8 o'clock approached, he found himself genuinely curious about whether she would actually appear. The grandfather clock in the foyer began to chime 8, and right on cue, the doorbell rang. James moved to answer it, but Elliot waved him off, suddenly wanting to see this moment for himself. He opened the door, and there stood Nia Brooks, but not quite as he'd expected. She was still wearing her maid's uniform, but somehow she carried herself differently, straighter, more confident. Her hair was neatly pinned back, and she'd applied just a touch of makeup that highlighted her natural features. "Good evening, Mr. Carter," she said, her voice steadier than he'd ever heard it. "Thank you for the invitation." As she stepped across the threshold, Elliot noticed something he'd missed before. Her eyes weren't just intelligent, they were calculating, almost as if she knew exactly what kind of evening this was supposed to be. And for the first time since his friends had suggested this cruel joke, he wondered if maybe, just maybe, they had all underestimated Nia Brooks. The real question was, what was she planning to do about it? The murmur of conversation died like a wave hitting a seawall as Nia stepped into the grand ballroom. Elliot watched the ripple effect spread through the crowd, heads turning, whispers starting, champagne glasses pausing halfway to lips. The crystal chandelier above cast a spotlight on her simple uniform, making her stand out like a single dark note in a symphony of silk and diamonds. "Is that the help?" someone whispered loudly enough for half the room to hear. "What is she doing here?" another voice added, barely concealed behind a jeweled fan. Nia's chin lifted slightly, but her expression remained serene. She moved with quiet grace, her eyes scanning the room with the same methodical attention she used when cleaning it. But tonight, instead of cataloging dust and disorder, she seemed to be cataloging people, their faces, their reactions, their barely concealed shock. Caroline Whitmore nearly choked on her champagne. "Oh my God, she actually came!" she hissed to Victoria, who was staring open-mouthed at Nia's uniform. "This is even better than I imagined," Victoria whispered back, her voice dripping with anticipation. "Look at her, she's like a lost puppy." But Elliot noticed something they missed. Nia didn't look lost at all. Her dark eyes held a quiet confidence as she observed the room full of people who clearly saw her as an intruder in their exclusive world. She didn't fidget or seem nervous. If anything, she appeared to be studying them with the same intensity as scientists might observe specimens under a microscope. "Elliot, darling," Caroline called out, her voice artificially bright. "Why don't you introduce us to your guest?" The words hung in the air like a challenge. Elliot felt dozens of eyes on him, waiting to see how he would handle this social bomb his friends had helped him detonate. He approached Nia, aware that every step was being scrutinized by the crowd. "Everyone," he announced, his voice carrying across the room. "I'd like you to meet Nia Brooks." The introduction was met with polite but puzzled applause. Nia nodded graciously, her hands clasped calmly in front of her. "Hello," she said simply, her voice clear and steady. "Thank you for welcoming me to your beautiful home, Mr. Carter." The Pemberton twins, identical socialites known for their cutting remarks, exchanged meaningful glances. "How refreshing," one of them said, the word dripping with condescension. "Tell us, Nia, what do you do for work?" The question was clearly designed to embarrass her, to force her to admit her position in front of this crowd of wealthy elite. The room seemed to hold its breath, waiting for her response. Nia's lips curved in the slightest of smiles. "I help maintain beautiful spaces," she said evenly. "I believe there's dignity in all honest work, don't you?" The simple response somehow managed to make the Pemberton twins' question sound petty and cruel. Several guests shifted uncomfortably, and Elliot found himself impressed by her composure. Marcus Wellington, however, wasn't ready to let the moment pass. "How fascinating," he said, his tone making it clear he found it anything but. "I imagine you don't often get to see how the other half lives." "You'd be surprised," Nia replied, her eyes meeting his directly. "I observe quite a lot from where I work." There was something in her tone, not quite a threat, but a suggestion that she saw more than people realized. Marcus's smile faltered slightly. As the evening progressed, Nia remained at the edges of conversations, politely declining offers of champagne and expensive hors d'oeuvres. She seemed content to observe, responding when spoken to but not pushing herself into discussions about yacht parties in Monaco or charity galas in the Hamptons. "She's not playing the game right," Caroline complained to Elliot during a quiet moment. "She's supposed to be out of her depth, trying too hard to fit in. Instead, she's just watching." And she was watching. Elliot noticed how Nia's eyes followed the conversations, how she seemed to catalogue every dismissive comment, every sneer, every whispered joke at her expense. But rather than seeming hurt or intimidated, she appeared to be gathering information, as if she were building a mental file on each person in the room. "Perhaps she's more intelligent than we gave her credit for," Elliot found himself saying, surprising himself with the defensive tone in his voice. "Don't tell me you're actually falling for this act." Victoria laughed. "She's probably planning to steal the silverware." The comment was loud enough for Nia to hear, but she didn't react. She simply continued her quiet observation, occasionally nodding politely when someone made a particularly pointed comment about her presence. As the party moved toward its midpoint, Elliot realized that his friend's plan was backfiring. Instead of providing entertainment through her embarrassment, Nia was making them all look petty and small-minded. Her quiet dignity in the face of their barely concealed mockery was far more powerful than any defensive outbursts would have been. But there was something else in her demeanor, a sense of waiting, as if she were biding her time for something. When Elliot caught her eye across the room, she smiled slightly, and he had the unsettling feeling that whatever she was waiting for, it was about to begin. The question was no longer whether she would survive the evening with her dignity intact. The question was what she planned to do next. The evening had reached that dangerous point where champagne loosened tongues and inhibitions fell away like expensive jewelry carelessly dropped on marble floors. Marcus Wellington had consumed enough alcohol to make his usual cruelty seem like brilliant entertainment, and he'd gathered a small audience of equally intoxicated socialites around him. "You know what would be absolutely hilarious?" he announced, his voice carrying across the room with the confidence of someone who never faced consequences for his actions. "We should have our little guest perform for us. After all, isn't that what parties are for? Entertainment?" Victoria clapped her hands together with delight. "Oh, what a marvelous idea! I'm sure she has some interesting talents to share." The suggestion rippled through the crowd like poison through water. Guests began to gather, their faces lit with the same anticipation people might have watching a car accident. Horrible, but impossible to look away from. "Come now, Nia," Caroline called out, her voice sickeningly sweet. "Don't be shy. We're all friends here." Elliot felt his stomach drop. This was exactly the kind of cruel spectacle he'd feared when he'd first agreed to his friend's scheme. He opened his mouth to intervene, but Nia spoke first. "What kind of performance did you have in mind?" she asked, her voice steady and curious rather than defensive. "Well," Marcus gestured grandly toward the corner of the room. "We have that beautiful Steinway piano that Elliot's mother was so proud of. Surely you can bang out a tune or two?" The suggestion was clearly meant to humiliate her. The piano was a masterpiece, a concert grand that had cost more than most people's houses. It was meant to be played by professionals, not servants trying to entertain their betters. "I'm not sure that's appropriate," Elliot finally managed, but Marcus waved him off. "Oh, come on, old boy. Don't be such a spoilsport. It's all in good fun." Nia looked at the piano, then back at the expectant crowd. Something shifted in her expression, not fear or embarrassment, but something that looked almost like anticipation. "Actually," she said quietly, "I'd be honored to play for you." The crowd exchanged glances of delighted surprise. They'd expected her to refuse, to admit she couldn't play, to provide them with the embarrassment they'd been hoping for all evening. Instead, she was walking toward the piano with the same quiet confidence she'd maintained all night. "This should be rich," Victoria whispered to Caroline. $20 says she can't even find middle C." Nia settled onto the piano bench, her fingers hovering over the keys for just a moment. The room fell silent, everyone holding their breath for what they assumed would be a disaster. Then she began to play. The first notes that emerged weren't the clumsy attempts of an amateur, but something entirely different. Rich, complex harmonies filled the room, a piece that was both classical and modern, technically challenging and emotionally devastating. Her fingers moved across the keys with the precision of someone who had spent years mastering their craft. The effect was immediate and profound. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Champagne glasses paused halfway to lips. The cruel anticipation on faces transformed into something approaching shock. But it wasn't just the technical skill that silenced the room, it was the emotion. The music seemed to tell a story of pain and beauty, of dreams deferred and hope sustained. It spoke of quiet strength in the face of dismissal, of dignity maintained when others tried to strip it away. Elliot found himself transfixed. This wasn't just competent playing, this was artistry of the highest order. The woman he'd barely noticed for 3 years, the quiet maid who'd cleaned his house and remained invisible, was revealing herself to be a musician of extraordinary talent. As the piece built to its climax, Nia's entire being seemed to pour into the music. Her eyes were closed, her face peaceful, as if she'd finally found a language that could express everything she'd been forced to keep silent. The notes rose and fell like waves, carrying with them all the unspoken truths of her experience. When the final note faded into silence, the room remained frozen. No one spoke. No one moved. The only sound was the subtle echo of the piano's strings still vibrating in the sudden quiet. Then, slowly, someone began to clap. Not the polite, obligatory applause of high society, but genuine appreciation. Others joined in, until the entire room was applauding with an enthusiasm that bordered on reverence. Nia opened her eyes and stood, her expression serene. She'd just shattered every assumption they'd made about her, turned their cruel joke into something beautiful and profound. The servant they'd invited to mock had revealed herself to be more accomplished than any of them. "Thank you," she said simply, as if she just performed a small favor rather than delivered a performance that would haunt their memories for years to come. The silence that followed was deafening. The entertainment they'd sought had become something else entirely, a revelation that left them all questioning what else they'd failed to see. Elliot stood frozen in the aftermath of Nia's performance, his world tilted on its axis. The woman who had quietly dusted his piano for 3 years had just played it with the skill of a concert pianist. His mind struggled to process what he'd witnessed, like trying to solve a puzzle with pieces that didn't fit his understanding of reality. "That was..." he began, then stopped, realizing he had no words adequate for what had just happened. The crowd around him was experiencing their own collective shock. The Pemberton twins, who had spent the evening making cutting remarks, now looked as if they'd been slapped. Marcus Wellington's face had gone pale beneath his tan, his earlier smugness replaced by something that looked dangerously close to embarrassment. "Where did you learn to play like that?" Victoria asked, her voice small and uncertain for the first time all evening. Nia smoothed her uniform skirt and looked at the crowd with the same calm composure she'd maintained throughout the evening. "I've been studying piano since I was 7, she said simply. "My grandmother taught me the basics, and I've been practicing ever since." "But you're a..." Caroline started, then caught herself before finishing the sentence. "A maid?" Nia supplied helpfully. "Yes, I am." "Does that somehow make my fingers work differently?" The question hung in the air like an accusation. Several guests shifted uncomfortably, suddenly aware of how their assumptions had been not just wrong, but cruel. Elliot found himself moving toward Nia, drawn by a force he couldn't name. "That was extraordinary," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I had no idea you could play like that." "You never asked?" she replied, her eyes meeting his directly. There was no accusation in her tone, but the simple statement carried the weight of 3 years of invisibility. "The piece you played?" he pressed, desperate to understand more about this woman who had just revealed herself to be a complete mystery. "What was it?" "I've never heard anything like it." "I wrote it," Nia said matter-of-factly. "It's called Scene. I composed it last year." The revelation hit Elliot like a physical blow. Not only could she play with professional skill, but she was also a composer. How many evenings had he passed by the service quarters, completely unaware that one of the most talented musicians he'd ever heard was just footsteps away. "You wrote that?" he repeated, his voice barely above a whisper. "Music has always been my way of saying things I couldn't say out loud," she explained. "When you spend most of your time invisible, you find other ways to express yourself." The word invisible struck something deep in Elliot's chest. He thought of all the times he'd walked past her in the hallways, given her perfunctory nods, treated her as part of the household furniture. She had been invisible to him, by his own choice. "Nia," he said, stepping closer, "I owe you an apology. Not just for tonight, but for not seeing you. Really seeing you." Something flickered in her eyes, surprise, maybe, or perhaps wariness. "And what do you see now, Mr. Carter?" The question was a challenge, and Elliot found himself searching for words that would be honest rather than patronizing. "I see someone who has more talent in her little finger than most people have in their entire bodies. I see someone who has been hiding extraordinary gifts while cleaning up after people who wouldn't recognize real artistry if it hit them in the face." "Including yourself?" she asked quietly. "Especially myself," he admitted, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. The crowd around them was beginning to disperse, many guests looking uncomfortable with the sudden shift in the evening's dynamic. The entertainment they'd come for had turned into something that made them confront their own prejudices, and most of them wanted nothing more than to escape. But Elliot couldn't move away. He was transfixed by this woman who had just shattered his understanding of his own world. "Why didn't you ever say anything? Why didn't you tell anyone you could play like that? Who would have listened?" Nia asked. And more importantly, who would have believed that the maid had anything worthwhile to say? The question hit him like a slap. She was right, of course. If she had mentioned her musical abilities, he would have assumed she meant she could play simple melodies, not create art that could move people to tears. "I would have listened," he said, though even as the words left his mouth, he wasn't sure they were true. "Would you?" she asked, tilting her head slightly. 3 years, Mr. Carter. 3 years of good morning, Nia, and thank you, Nia, and please dust the piano, Nia. When exactly would you have stopped to listen? Her words weren't bitter, just matter-of-fact, which somehow made them more devastating. Elliot realized he was seeing himself through her eyes, a man who had reduced her to a function rather than recognizing her as a person with dreams, talents, and a rich inner life. "You're right," he said finally. "I wouldn't have. But I'm listening now." "Are you?" she asked, and there was something in her voice that suggested this conversation was far from over. The party continued around them, but it felt distant now, like background noise from another world. Elliot found himself guiding Nia toward the French doors that led to the garden terrace, away from the curious stares and whispered conversations that followed in the wake of her performance. "I need some air," he said, though what he really needed was to understand this woman who had just turned his world upside down. The terrace was bathed in moonlight, the manicured gardens stretching out below them like a silver-touched painting. The sounds of the party drifted through the open doors behind them, but out here, they could finally speak without an audience analyzing their every word. "Tell me about the music," Elliot said, settling onto one of the stone benches that overlooked the rose garden. "How long have you been composing?" Nia remained standing, her hands resting on the terrace railing. "Since I was 12, she said. "My grandmother used to say that music was the only language that could speak truths too difficult for words. Your grandmother sounds like a wise woman. She was a piano teacher before she got sick," Nia continued, her voice soft with memory. "She taught me that music wasn't just about playing notes correctly. It was about telling stories, sharing emotions, connecting with something deeper than surface appearances." Elliot watched her profile in the moonlight, noting the way her expression softened when she spoke about her grandmother. "Is that why you took this job? To be close to a piano?" She turned to look at him, and he saw something vulnerable in her eyes. "Partly. But mostly because I needed to survive. Music doesn't pay the bills, especially not when you're a young black woman without connections or formal credentials." The stark honesty of her statement hit him like a physical blow. While he'd been born into privilege, taking for granted his access to the finest instruments and the best teachers, she'd been fighting just to have a space where she could practice her art. "You could have had formal training," he said. "You have the talent." "With what money?" she asked, not unkindly. "Conservatory education costs more than most people make in a year. And even if I could afford it, how many orchestras are looking for black female composers? How many concert halls would program my pieces?" Her words forced him to confront realities he never had to consider. His world of privilege had insulated him from the harsh truths that people like Nia faced every day. "So you've been hiding your gift," he said. "Not hiding," she corrected. "Protecting. There's a difference." "Protecting it from what?" She was quiet for a moment, her eyes focused on the garden below. "From people who would either dismiss it as impossible or try to take credit for it. From those who would want to turn it into something it's not, or use it for their own purposes." "Like me?" he asked quietly. "I don't know yet," she said, turning to face him fully. "What do you want from me, Mr. Carter?" The question caught him off guard. What did he want? An hour ago, he would have said he wanted nothing from her at all. She was just part of the household staff, invisible and unimportant. Now, sitting here in the moonlight, he found himself wanting to know everything about her. "I want to understand," he said finally. "I want to know how I've been so blind. I want to know what other gifts you've been hiding while dusting my furniture." "I write poetry," she said simply. "And I paint watercolors. I speak 3 languages fluently, and I'm teaching myself Italian. I've read every book in your library, twice, and I could probably run your business better than half the people you employ." Each revelation was like a small explosion in his chest. The woman he'd barely noticed possessed an intellect and range of talents that put his own privileged education to shame. "Why are you telling me this?" he asked. "Because you asked?" she said. "And because I'm tired of being invisible. Tonight, when your friends invited me here as a joke, I decided I was done hiding. I was done protecting myself from people who couldn't see my worth anyway. They were cruel," he said, shame coloring his voice. "I was cruel. I went along with their plan because I thought it would be entertaining." "I know," she said. "I've always known exactly what I was to you. A convenient non-person who kept your house clean and stayed out of your way." "That's not," he began, but she held up a hand. "Please don't lie to me, Mr. Carter. Not now. We've moved past that." He closed his eyes, accepting the truth of her words. "You're right. I'm sorry. I don't want your pity." she said firmly. And I don't want your guilt. What I want is for you to see me as I am, not as a project to be saved or a mistake to be corrected. Then what are you? He asked, genuinely curious. I'm a woman with dreams that extend far beyond this house, she said. I'm someone who has spent years building walls to protect herself, but who might be ready to let them down for the right person. The implication hung between them like a bridge waiting to be crossed. The party inside was winding down, the last guests making their polite goodbyes after an evening that had taken an unexpected turn. Elliot could hear car doors slamming in the driveway, the sound of his carefully orchestrated social event coming to an end. But he wasn't ready for this conversation to be over. I need to ask you something, he said, standing from the bench to face her properly. Tonight, when you played that piece, Scene, was that the first time you'd played it for anyone? Nia nodded. I've never performed any of my compositions for an audience before. I usually just play them alone, when the house is empty. All those nights when I heard piano music and assumed it was the sound system, he said, pieces of a puzzle finally clicking into place. That was you. Every Tuesday and Thursday evening, when you work late at the office, she confirmed. I had permission from James to use the piano for practice, but I was careful to only play when no one was home. Elliot felt a strange mixture of wonder and regret. How many compositions have you written? 47 complete pieces, she said without hesitation. Some are variations on classical themes, others are entirely original. I've been working on a piano concerto, but I've never had the opportunity to hear it played with a full orchestra. The scope of her hidden creative life was staggering. While he'd been attending charity galas and business dinners, she'd been creating a body of work that could rival any conservatory graduate. Nia, he said, his voice heavy with emotion, I want to make you an offer. She tensed slightly, her expression becoming guarded. What kind of offer? I want to fund your musical education. Properly. The best conservatory, the finest teachers, whatever you need to develop your talent to its fullest potential. The words hung in the air between them. Nia's face went through several emotions, surprise, hope, and then something that looked like disappointment. As what? She asked quietly. Your charity case? Your way of easing your conscience about 3 years of treating me like furniture? No, he said firmly. As an investment in extraordinary talent. As recognition of what you've already accomplished on your own. And what would you expect in return? The question revealed the crux of her wariness. She'd learned to be suspicious of offers that seemed too good to be true, especially from people who had previously dismissed her worth. Nothing, he said. I would expect nothing in return except the satisfaction of knowing that the world will get to hear your music as it deserves to be heard. She studied his face in the moonlight, searching for hidden motives. People like you don't give away opportunities like that without expecting something back. Then maybe I'm not the person you think I am, he said. Maybe tonight has changed me as much as it's revealed you. Has it? She asked, the question carrying the weight of every interaction they'd had over the past 3 years. Yes, he said simply. I can't unknow what I know now. I can't pretend you're just a maid anymore. And I can't stand the thought of your talent being wasted because of my blindness. Nia walked to the edge of the terrace, her hands gripping the stone railing. And what about after? What happens when I'm no longer convenient background scenery in your life? I hope, he said carefully, that you'll still be part of my life. Not as an employee, but as someone I want to know better. She turned to face him, and he saw tears glittering in her eyes. You realize what you're offering me, don't you? Not just education, but freedom. The chance to be who I really am instead of who I've had to pretend to be. I'm beginning to understand, he said. And I'm beginning to understand what I've been missing. This isn't a fairy tale, Mr. Carter, she said, her voice soft but serious. I won't magically transform into someone who fits into your world. I'll still be a black woman from a working-class background, still someone who speaks uncomfortable truths, still someone who won't pretend to be grateful for scraps. I don't want you to transform, he said, stepping closer. I want you to be exactly who you are. And I want to learn to be someone worthy of knowing you. The vulnerability in his voice seemed to break down her last wall of defense. This is terrifying, she admitted. For 3 years, I've been safe in my invisibility. Now you're asking me to step into the light. I'm asking you to let me step into the light with you, he corrected. As equals. As people who see each other for who we really are. She was quiet for a long moment, the weight of the decision settling between them. Then, slowly, she smiled, the first genuine, unguarded smile he'd ever seen from her. All right, Mr. Carter, she said. But I have one condition. Anything. Call me Nia. Just Nia. If we're going to do this, we start as equals. All right, Nia, he said, her name feeling different on his tongue now, not a label, but an identity. And you should call me Elliot. As they stood there in the moonlight, the last sounds of the party fading behind them, both of them knew that nothing would ever be the same. The joke that had brought them together had transformed into something neither had expected, a chance for both of them to become more than they had been before. The real beginning was just starting.